January 26, 1996. An Olympian wrestler is gunned down in his own driveway in front of his wife for seemingly no reason at all. The perpetrator turns out to be someone of wealth and privilege. In 2014, Steve Carrell gives a career-altering performance as the man who pulled that trigger, starring alongside Channing Tatum and Mark Ruffalo. Be careful who you work for, because Foxcatcher was inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is inspired by a true story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. We'll discuss the overall details of the actual crimes, then review the film on its own, how much of that is true, and how much was Hollywood magic. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website, and devoted true crime follower. And joining me today are my fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, Aaron, sweep the leg.
And Amanda Sink.
Hola, hola.
That's funny. What does Karate Kid have to do with Fox? Wrestling karate? Same thing?
It's close enough. Just let it.
It just seemed to be the most logical thing to say. I'm still working on this whole catchphrase.
You mean how to say hello on an opening of a podcast?
I mean, same difference.
I got to mention this. So in an October 2015 podcast, Mark Schultz, who this film is based on, revealed that du Pont was about 30 years old. When he was 30, a horse he was riding threw him into a fence and caused an injury to his testicles, and they became infected.
Both of them.
Yeah, and they got infected and had to be removed. And that's partly what they consider reasoning for why he became an androgynous character the rest of his life.
It's because it caused insecurity, and it likely caused the levels of insecurity and other stuff. But I'm sure it had a scientific biological effect on him too. I mean, it does in animals, right?
Yeah.
You lose your testicles and their behavior changes. Their mentality changes.
I'm
speechless.
Flummoxed.
I'm flummoxed.
I'm flummoxed. I'm kind of thankful that that's happened because, I don't think he propagated any children, did he?
I'm not at liberty to say.
The Du Pont family is going to come after us or something? Is that what you're worried about?
I mean, there is in vitro and there is adoption, but no, he had no children. It'd be kind of hard to make some with no testicles.
Mm-hmm. That's how it works, though. So.
Oh, yep. Thank you, Amanda, for letting us know that's how it works.
Well, it was mostly for you. You seemed a little confused by that process.
No, I'm not confused by the process. I'm just kind of going through the whole motion of okay, so he fell off a horse, and if it wasn't for his horse, there's a whole lot of things that I'm going along with on this. That's
so really what we're saying is this is all the horse's fault?
It's all the horse's fault.
I mean, a horse is a horse unless, of course, he kicks you in the balls, and then he's glue, I would guess. Yeah? No?
I'm just going to go now. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So Foxcatcher, you guys had never seen Foxcatcher before, correct?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, this is my first time sitting down and watching this movie.
Okay, so hold that thought. We're going to come back to the movie after we discuss everything that actually happened. But had you ever heard of this particular case?
Yes, I had heard of the case. It is a fairly famous true crime case, so it is something that gets covered every so many years. So it is something I have heard of.
So before you watched the movie, I guess, before you did research for the podcast, what were your thoughts on how this unraveled?
It's one of those things where I'm like, is this a story of just a crazy rich guy, or is this a story of something else? Is this a story of now the whole testicle thing, which somehow that did not get into my radar, or maybe if it did, I just kept on forgetting that was a thing that happened. I'm wondering
That's why I mentioned it at the top, because it's fascinating. It's a fascinating fact. I don't know why. Yeah.
I wonder if there was at least the beginnings of something between Mark and him that would have been weird, or weirder than we already saw in the movie. There's a lot.
I'm the type that anytime we do any of these or any movies that are based on a true story or based on a book or anything like that, I want to watch the movie before I dive into any of the real details, because otherwise I'm going to spend the entire time looking at it and saying that's not what happened. Mm-hmm. So I went into it completely blind, other than knowing that it was like had to do with wrestling, which was already taking a notch off the belt for me, where I'm like, ugh, yucky. I don't like wrestling. It's boring.
Ooh.
But
it's a sport, though. I mean, it's an Olympic sport.
It's a sport. Yeah, you're right.
You do not sound
a sport by definition.
You sound more convinced that the Cobra Kai reference made more sense to you than this does.
It would be cooler if that's what we were watching.
Ooh,
but anyway,
wow.
I digress. I know.
Well, if you can find a way that Karate Kid was inspired by a true story, we can somehow slide it in, I guess. But it wasn't.
Right. You got men who are in fairly decent shape wearing singlets and rolling around the ground, and you're not like, oh, I'm in?
No.
But apparently you are, John. That's what I'm getting.
The uniforms are specifically what don't do it for me. It's not like a gymnastics leotard where it's still cute and flattering. It looks like it's been stretched out, and they've been wearing the same one since they were 3 years old. Like, it doesn't look good. Now, I also am very well aware that they like put the little cup in their business to protect their parts and all of that. So even that,
not
I'm like,
always.
this is all fraudulent. This isn't even real.
This is not like the WWE. This is actually real wrestling. This is a real sport. It's not like none of these guys come out and go, all right.
Right.
Hey, brother. None of that happens.
That was good.
Here.
That was good.
Yeah, thanks.
But anyway, about the movie itself. So I went in very blind, did not expect anything, but, obviously there was some sort of crime involved in that it had to do with wrestling.
Oh, man.
And then, yeah.
The crime itself, much like it happened in real life, did not see coming.
Correct. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Much like in real life, that was savage.
Sorry, I didn't mean it bad. That's factual. All right, so as of the recording of this podcast, Foxcatcher is available to rent digitally on most major retailers, but that is always subject to change. U.S. Olympic wrestling champions and brothers Mark Schultz and Dave Schultz joined Team Foxcatcher at different points in their lives, as led by eccentric multi-millionaire John du Pont, as they trained for the 1988 Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. But John's self-destructive behavior threatens to consume them all. The film was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Actor Steve Carrell, Best Supporting Actor Mark Ruffalo, Director Bennett Miller, Screenplay by E. Max Fry and Dan Futterman, and Makeup and Hairstyle by Bill Corso and Dennis Lidiar.
Makeup, I get.
You get the makeup because of the nose?
The nose, the aging, like all of it. Yeah, I get that.
The one thing I want to say before we continue into this, though, Channing Tatum was not nominated, and I think he gives the strongest performance in the movie. But we'll come back to that and see if you guys agree. New episodes are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, or at thehollywoodoutsider.com or inspiredbyatruestory.com. Takes you to the same place. You can also hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider. Film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. So strap on your fake noses. Let's take a look at the facts behind Foxcatcher.
Please be warned. Inspired by a True Story deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
1986. The establishment of Foxcatcher Farms. John E. du Pont, an heir to the DuPont chemical fortune and a wrestling enthusiast, establishes Foxcatcher Farm as a world-class training facility for Olympic-level wrestlers. The farm, located in Newton Square, Pennsylvania, features state-of-the-art training facilities, including wrestling rooms, living quarters, and more. DuPont used his wealth to attract talented wrestlers to train at Foxcatcher Farm. The Foxcatcher wrestling team achieves notable success in the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, with Mark Schultz winning a gold medal in freestyle wrestling. Mark's older brother, Dave Schultz, a respected wrestler and coach, also experiences success, winning a world championship. The success of the Foxcatcher team contributes to John du Pont's growing reputation as a patron of wrestling. Du Pont's mental health began to deteriorate, marked by increasingly erratic behavior and signs of paranoia. Reports suggest that du Pont became isolated and exhibited bizarre conduct, including displaying erratic mood swings and making grandiose claims about his importance. Mark Schultz is an American freestyle wrestler born on October 26, 1960. Mark achieved significant success in his wrestling career, winning a gold medal in freestyle wrestling at the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, and along with his brother Dave, became associated with Foxcatcher Farm, where they trained under the sponsorship and financial support of John du Pont. Dave Schultz was born on June 6, 1959. He was also an accomplished American freestyle wrestler and coach. He was highly regarded in the wrestling community for his technical expertise and sportsmanship. Dave won a gold medal in freestyle wrestling at the 1984 Olympics, the same year as his brother Mark. He also won several world championships. After retiring from competitive wrestling, Dave took on a coaching role at Foxcatcher Farm. He played a key role in training and mentoring athletes at the facility. The Schultz brothers developed a relationship with John du Pont, who provided financial support for their training at Foxcatcher Farm. Dave, in particular, had a close relationship with du Pont, serving as the wrestling coach at Foxcatcher and contributing to the success of the team. Of particular note, Mark Schultz and Dave Schultz were not at Foxcatcher together as it was portrayed in the film. In fact, Mark Schultz left in 1988 and was even married by 1990, 6 full years before the January event, and eventually he had 3 children. Dave Schultz, on the other hand, arrived in 1989 and remained until that fateful day. By many accounts, in his personal life, there was no one closer to John du Pont than Dave Schultz, though he was not a yes man. Dave would tell John expressly how things were, even amidst John's mental health struggles. Everything in this relationship came to a head on January 26, 1996. At around 2 p.m., John du Pont ordered a security consultant, Patrick Goodale, to drive him to Dave Schultz's house, located on the Foxcatcher estate. Dave Schultz, upon seeing his boss and friend, John du Pont, smiled, gave a wave, and stated a pleasant, "Hi, boss." John du Pont replied by pointing his .44 Magnum at Dave's head, and then screaming, "You got a problem with me?" before pulling the trigger, murdering Dave on the spot. Patrick Goodale jumped out of the vehicle. His first instinct was to check on Dave. Though once removed from the vehicle, Goodale pulled a small pistol from his ankle holster and aimed it at du Pont. Du Pont simply drove away, before holding himself up in his mansion while the police negotiated his surrender. This led to a 48-hour standoff with law enforcement. They did so by eventually turning off du Pont's heat. Once du Pont became cold, he turned himself in. He was not apprehended quickly after the murder, as displayed in the film. Rich people, am I right? Schultz's wife, Nancy, and du Pont's head of security, Patrick Goodale, who was a former U.S. Marine officer, were both present and witnessed the shooting. When Dave's wife was asked why John du Pont murdered her husband, Nancy replied, "Because he's insane." Dave Schultz was 36 years old at the time of his murder. He was a world champion and Olympian. He was also an accomplished coach and trainer. He was survived by his wife, Nancy, his son, Alexander, and his daughter, Danielle. And on his hand, he had written the initials PU, along with the word kids. This was due to it being his turn to pick up his children later that day. Nancy Schultz settled with the du Pont estate over the death of her husband, Dave. It was reported that the settlement was for around $35 million, though that is solely speculation from anonymous sources. Kevin Jackson, world and Olympic champion who trained at Foxcatcher from 1990 to 1995, said, and I quote, "There was no one else who carried himself like Dave. He was an ambassador for the sport, a one-of-a-kind, and someone a lot of people called friend." Dave Schultz made an impact on a lot of people's lives. An interesting quote once attributed to Mark Schultz in regards to John du Pont. He said, "If you didn't want to be displayed on his wall, he'd ruin you." The motive for the murder remains completely unclear. Some reports suggesting it may have been related to DuPont's deteriorating mental state and a strained relationship with Schultz. DuPont's friends claim the murder was uncharacteristic. John du Pont is charged with the murder of Dave Schultz shortly after. The defense argues that DuPont suffered from mental health issues that diminished his capacity at the time of the murder. In 1997, DuPont is found guilty but mentally ill and is sentenced to prison. DuPont serves his sentence at the State Correctional Institution in Laurel Highlands, Pennsylvania. On December 9, 2010, DuPont died in prison at the age of 72. The cause of death is reported as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. When it comes to the motives behind the murder of Dave Schultz at Foxcatcher Farm in 1996, things remain somewhat unclear and have been the subject of much speculation. Some factors that may have contributed to the tragedy included John du Pont's mental health had been deteriorating in the years leading up to the murder. Reports suggested that he did exhibit erratic behavior, paranoia, and isolation. His mental state may have played a significant role in the events. There were also indications of a very strained relationship with John du Pont and with Dave Schultz. While du Pont had initially been a benefactor and supporter of the Schultz brothers' wrestling careers, there were reported tensions and disagreements leading up to the murder. The power dynamics at Foxcatcher Farm may have contributed to the tensions. Du Pont, as the wealthy benefactor, held a position of authority over the athletes, including Dave Schultz. Conflicts related to control and decision-making could have played a role as well. Reports suggested that John du Pont became increasingly isolated on the Foxcatcher estate and was suspicious of those around him. Paranoia may have fueled irrational beliefs and actions, contributing to the tragic outcome. John du Pont's defense during his trial claimed that he was mentally ill at the time of the murder. The defense argued diminished capacity due to his deteriorating mental state, which could have influenced his actions as we spoke to. There were also many personal issues in du Pont's life, including difficulties in his relationships and a sense of isolation, and that may have added to the emotional and psychological strain he experienced. We'll never know exactly why he murdered Dave Schultz. But in terms of legacy, the Schultz brothers' contributions to wrestling are remembered and celebrated. They left a lasting impact on the sport, both as athletes and coaches. The tragic death of Dave Schultz brought attention to the complexities of the relationship between athletes and their wealthy sponsors, as well as the mental health issues faced by John du Pont. What a freaking story.
It's wild, especially when you, like, as you're watching the movie and you watch these dynamics change and you feel like it's more so just going to be something, I don't know. I didn't know what the crime was going to be, but I just kept coming back to the more so the focus and the dynamic of Mark and Dave and how, you know, that struggle was in terms of the mental capacity for Mark and how his insecurity and all of that. And then with John, you get to the end and you're just like, for me, I was like, did I miss something significant? Like, what happened here? Why did this happen? Because it happened
so suddenly, right?
It does. And like, he's just, you know, you can tell that he's not in a good place when he's sitting in his chair before he tells his driver to warm up the car or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the following steps is just not what I expected. I figured maybe he was like gonna argue with someone or there would be like a fight break out or I don't know what was gonna happen. But I didn't expect him to just be like, hey, boss. Wait, what? Like, that was wild.
In terms of the movie, it took me completely out of it. I was not expecting it. And then when you read into it and that's actually what happened, that's, I think, terrified me even more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that, Amanda, that was the cutest little gun noise. Pew, pew, pew.
Thank you. I will sell my rights to Disney.
Right. If the Disney ever needs a little cute little gun noise, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this case is it's got like that air of a perfect storm of issues. Or you got one guy who's wildly dependent on either his brother, or then he becomes wildly dependent on John du Pont. And then, he feels like he is on top of the world because he's finally getting out of somebody's shadow. And then you got John du Pont insisting that David be brought into this whole activity they're doing because, he wants the best. He's a rich guy. He needs the best. The way he imposes his will on Mark is just sad, and it hurts. It hurts to watch, and it hurts to see how it goes. Of course, something like this happens. It's just a perfect storm of people, all sorts of people with either needs or mental health issues, churns into this mess of like a sudden act of whatever it was.
Correct me if I'm wrong. In the movie, they do not show that he's married, right? At any point, Mark Schultz?
No, they don't show him being married at all in the movie.
Because he was actually married at the time his brother died, which I find interesting that you wouldn't include that.
Yeah, that's weird. Because they show his brother's wife.
Mm-hmm.
So that's bizarre. The other thing that's kind of interesting when you explore some of the specifics of the paranoia in the voices he would hear, the sounds he would hear, and I guess Dave was one of the only ones who would like call out to John and say, no, that's not happening. That's not real. So he was obviously hallucinating. But I find that to be interesting. And there were some speculations too about, does that have anything to do with it? The fact that he was kind of naysaying his hallucinations. And I mean, I don't know. Regardless of the reasoning, it's super bizarre. But I also find it behavior? I find it really fascinating that the person he was basically closest to by everyone's accounts is the person he just like randomly went up to and shot, was like, do you have a problem with me? And then his pew, pew, pew.
That sounds like mental illness. It sounds very much like his mind snapped. Yeah. And, we'll never know why. He might not even know why.
I'm sure he didn't. Yeah.
He's dead. So I guess you'll definitely never know why he did what he did.
Jesus.
Sorry.
Well, that was subtle.
Unless if you believe in like a heaven and a hell, he might be able to reflect on some of those things.
Maybe, but it's a very tragic story. I mean, you have the only brothers, I believe, to ever both win Olympic medals in wrestling. I mean, that alone is a movie worth telling. Right, that's a story that's worth watching, unless you don't like wrestling like Amanda. But if it doesn't matter what the sport is, I think that's a really impressive feat. And how did they, get there together? How did they come up? That whole story, that would be fascinating to me. The fact that it's unfortunately muddled with tragedy is the real sad part of all of this, because their story should be one of positivity, one of inspiration, one of you rise up and you can achieve anything. And instead it ends up being a lesson that you just never know what's going to happen. You just don't know. I mean, man was basically gunned down in front of his wife for no reason that anyone can ascertain.
The other interesting thing about this is just how different of a feel this gold medalist had versus what we know gold medalists to be today. Like gold medalists today are very much looked at as celebrities. Him and his brother are still like kind of struggling. They're still struggling to make ends meet. They just happen to be gold medalists and then real people. They're not somebody who gets to enjoy sponsorships or anything else because maybe it's wrestling or maybe because of the time.
I think it's got to be a big portion of it has to be wrestling. I don't know if wrestling is taken as seriously as gymnastics. I mean, Mary Lou Retton had multiple millions of dollars from advertising and
That's true.
Different aspects.
Mary Lou Retton, everyone who ran.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Olympic gymnastics champions who went on to great success with advertisement and got on a box of whatever, Cheerios or whatever it is. This didn't happen in wrestling. And there is a stigma that comes with wrestling. You know, Amanda kind of alluded to it earlier, but because of the entertainment factor of wrestling, I think it's harder for mainstream America to take the actual wrestling as a sport seriously in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think that plays a component?
I'm trying to think of like something else that could be along the same lines, but I just think it's just one of those things where it doesn't feel as important just in general. But the weird thing is though is that Aaron, you and I went to high school in the 90s and
late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
All right, so I was giving you.
I appreciate that. God bless
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I remember in my high school, it was the football players and then it was the wrestlers. And sometimes the wrestlers were more loved than the football players were. That's how big the sport was at my school. And, this is going on in the 90s and still it's not being as celebrated as it should be because of the sport. So it's just weird, I think.
I think wrestling in high school is more respected than it is when you leave high school for whatever reason. I couldn't begin to tell you, but I really do think, WWE puts a bad light on it. I really believe because I think people that know the sport respect the sport. People that are more, your Joe Average that are just out there living their life. I think they hear wrestling, they think Randy Macho Man Savage. Oh yeah. They think the Kool-Aid guy basically on a wrestling mat. That's what they think of. They think of entertainment more so than a sport. Where if you really watch the actual sport of wrestling, it's very interesting to watch and it is hard. It's very difficult to do. People think it's not that hard. You just jump on another guy. You just like rolling around with another guy like someone, I think Amanda said earlier. It's more complicated than that. I mean, you're trying to basically control another human being that refuses to be controlled. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do.
You can barely do that to a toddler sometimes.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's all the entertainment. I do think that plays a factor, especially for some people. But I also think the other side of it is the high school observations of wrestling. Like that's what I think of when I think of wrestling. The WWE, I laugh at because I know it's scripted to, to some degree and all of that. So it's not really anything that I would consider like to be a real sport. I do know that there's a difference between that and real wrestling, but for whatever reason, I think a lot of it comes down to the uniforms. Like they look ridiculous. They look absolutely like none of that looks like a good time for them. The entire time I'd be worried about something popping out. You know what I mean? Like, let's get something a little bit more logistical.
Oh man.
Makes a little more sense.
Back on topic.
I know I'm being serious. I feel like that plays a factor in it. Yes, for me, I'm like, you look ridiculous.
What do you want them to wear? Ridiculous. Pajamas?
No, but they could literally wear anything else. If it just didn't even have the plunging neckline, it'd probably be 10 times better with that alone.
That is funny. Okay. Well, going back to John du Pont, right? So you have a guy who, by many accounts, has a very, his mental state is decreasing by the year, right? It's getting worse and worse and worse as he goes. Do we feel like it's painfully obvious because he was rich, people let that slide? The people by his side might have let that slide more so than they would have if he was, you or I, working at Walmart or something.
Of course, that's why they kept on letting it slide, because there's a lot of people who are depending on him as a source of income.
It's a benefactor. Yeah.
All these people their jobs literally just to get him from one day to another. And if they don't do that, then they're not getting paid. So yeah, it's obviously it has a lot to do with their money. Let's also not forget that people who are challenged in some sort of state like that are easier to take advantage of as well. it's to your advantage to sit there and say, all right, well, you were going to keep him going because, hell, not only am I getting my paycheck, but I'm getting some nice other stuff out of this too.
I think that it's definitely feasible. I mean, obviously, it's an assumption for us to say one way or the other, but I think it's absolutely feasible for that to play a factor in it. I mean, if you look at every rich person who committed a crime, practically, they all have had some level of leniency, or somebody who, you know, people are making justifications for them and, oh, poor this, poor that. Like, in the same way that somebody, if they didn't have any money or wealth whatsoever and they were poor, and like involved in, I don't know, I guess like more like gang violence, there's no justification for them. You know what I mean? So I do feel like there's the two-sided element to it where he probably does get a little bit more pity because of that.
We really need to stop connecting money and need. Because just because you have money doesn't mean you deserve anything more than anyone else. We still live in that world. It hasn't changed. And this is, you know, decades later. Let's talk about the movie, Foxcatcher. We're going to come back to some of the facts and what the movie got right or didn't get right. But as an overall film, without any knowledge of the case, sounds like for Amanda, but John, you did because you've heard other true crime podcasts. So John, let me ask you first, as someone who had knowledge of the crime, how did the movie work for you?
Overall, it worked fine. It was a bit of a hard watch. The way they painted a lot of the characters who weren't John du Pont was a little unfair. They left too much to be up in the air for it to be a good story for me. I do think Steve Carrell did a great job as far as an actor is concerned, and Channing Tatum was absolutely robbed. He has to carry the majority of the movie, and yet he doesn't get an award for this or doesn't get nominated for this, whereas his co-stars do, and I think that's wildly unfair.
Now, Amanda, as someone who had no idea about the case beforehand, please, because you've been waiting on bated breath to kind of touch this one. So go ahead.
You know, I was very surprised by the crime itself, as I've already kind of mentioned. The movie probably could have done without most of it. It was way too long. It wasn't even a misdirect of the crime. It was just as baffling. I think they wanted to make it as baffling to the audience as it is in reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's the way it came across to me. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Because you wait, 2 hours to figure out where is this going? Like, what is for us, right? Like, I went into it knowing that there is a crime, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a podcast about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just waiting with bated breath, trying to figure out what the heck is going to happen. And I can imagine if I didn't even know there was a crime, I would just think that this was like Eddie the Eagle, like, hey, we're gonna follow this guy on his little sports journey, and hopefully he gets everything he wants and he loses some of his insecurity, and him and his brother have like this relationship. I would have never expected the movie to end that way whatsoever. Having some insight, it was still shocking to me because there was nothing that I identified prior to that where I was like thinking potentially, yeah, this guy could do this. He would be capable of doing this to him, to Dave specifically. So the movie overall, I feel like it had its highest point at the end, which is really unfortunate because I never really felt like I had the climax of the film until the very end, until that moment happened. So the movie overall for me, I was not a fan of, but the story itself is fascinating.
Yeah, I walked into the movie knowing just that there was a murder. I didn't know who died. I knew that there was a murder, and I didn't know how it happened. I assumed it was John du Pont because, Steve Carell just had the look of somebody who's going to eventually kill somebody in the trailer. But as I'm watching it, I feel like the pacing was not well done, not well handled at all. I definitely felt as though it was too long. And I love a slow burn movie. I love a slow burn thriller where you build to it, but it left too many things open. And I don't mean necessarily why he did what he did. I don't need to know that. But I feel like we didn't know the motivations for a lot of things that were happening. We didn't really understand, we were having to piece together his whole relationship with his brother that I think you could have done a much better way and a much clearer way that could have benefited the film in many respects. There were times, I think, for the first 45 minutes to an hour of the movie, I assumed that Channing Tatum's character, Mark Schultz, had some kind of mental impairment, that he was mentally disabled in some way, because of the way that it was being presented. I'm not saying that in any kind of insulting way. I really felt like that's how the performance was going. And it kind of led me down the wrong path. And maybe that's the intent, but didn't make for a better film. Now, that doesn't take away from Channing Tatum's performance, mind you. I think he was playing it the way that it was written. I don't think the movie did that character any favors. The last half hour is enigmatic. It's really, really captivates that last half hour because of, that something's coming, you're not sure what it is. And then when it happens, it's so sporadic and unexpected that it's shocking. And there's very few things that shock anymore in movies because you see so many things coming that I think that's where that benefit was. But again, very slow paced. Took forever to get there. There are moments where I just don't understand what is happening in a character's head. And it's not that you have to understand everything, but you have to assemble a plot. It felt like a poem. It felt more like a poem of a movie than an actual movie. Like the story wasn't clear for a large portion of the film. And I hope that makes sense to you guys. But in terms of performances, the performances across the board are wonderful. Steve Carrell, I agree, did a wonderful job. I think Mark Ruffalo does a wonderful job and really, really painting a very loving brother. Even though his brother Mark seems to be very jealous of him and wants to get out of his shadow and wants to stand on his own 2 feet and everything else, Dave is still always there. Every single time is always there for his brother and loves him and will do whatever he can for him. And, they have an unspoken communication, which I did love that. I don't need language and dialogue for that because I don't think very often brothers can sit in the same room, or people that are very well connected can sit in the same room and have those unspoken connections. They don't have to talk. What, are you laughing because you don't think that's true? Or you're laughing?
No, I'm laughing because I know that's true.
Yeah, it is. Because if you have someone you're close to, you don't have to talk nonstop. You don't. Right. You can just, unlike what I've done for the last minute.
You can be comfortable in silence.
Yes. And you can still understand what the other person's thinking. You can look at someone and they get where you're coming from. And if you've been close to someone for any period of time, that's there, that exists. You have that unspoken communication. So I don't need dialogue for that. That played well off the actors. But Channing Tatum, I thought he was the best part of the movie. I couldn't take my eyes off him, even when I didn't understand what the hell was going on in portions of the film, or going on in his head, or wondering, is his character Sling Blade? Like, what is happening here? I don't quite understand. Trying to figure his character out when he's having the moments where he's slapping himself because he failed, where he's causing himself pain because he wants to remember that pain so that later, that's a negative that's reinforced so that he doesn't want to feel that again. So he's trying to win. And I just really disappointed that Steve Carell, yes, had the more noticeable change. He has a facial reconfiguring and plastic and makeup and and all that jive. That's great. But man, Channing Tatum, I thought, was such a better performer in this movie and really underappreciated by the critics.
The whole scene where he loses his mind and destroys his hotel room and gorges himself on food is hard to watch. And then when they try to get him back into fighting weight, and everything they do, like they make him throw up, they make him sit on a bike for 90 minutes straight just to sweat off as much as he could sweat off as possible. Like all of that, the way they played it out, the way they did, they showed that whole process felt very visceral and very real. It was a very strong performance, especially then.
But didn't you feel? And I've already said, I think he was wonderful in that. But during that moment where he's sweating off the 12 pounds, which is just a wild scene that many athletes do and people don't realize, while he's doing that, weren't you kind of wondering, like, why is he looking at DuPont like he hates him? I mean, I didn't think it was clear enough as I get kind of why he didn't like him. But I mean, he looks at him like with a rage that he just wants to end him in that moment while he's riding him and he's through the glass door and his brother goes to talk to him. Or am I wrong in that? Like, you got it.
No, I totally agree. And this is one of those times, where I sit there and I'm like, what happened? What happened that we didn't see? What part of this, with the exception of like, we saw John du Pont take Mark and raise him up as high as he possibly can. We saw John du Pont sit there and force him to call him Eagle and to speak about him glowingly in front of a bunch of people. We saw John du Pont make him dependent on cocaine. We saw John du Pont, all of a sudden he's got frosted tips, which is a crime,
that you get jailed for.
Right.
There's a lot of things we see happen. And then there's John du Pont sitting in a chair on the porch. And there's that moment where Mark takes a couple more bumps of cocaine and then he gets up to John and they kind of make it seem like there's something more there than is really happening.
Like a relationship of sorts.
Yeah. It's that crash and burn, that all of a sudden Mark isn't good enough for John and he needs to have David, and he's always lived in David's shadow and all. And Mark is rightfully putting John in his sights as far as knowing that John is the one who knocked him off of the pedestal that he was on a second ago and living life as greatly as he was. And he's rightly saying, this person hurt me. I get that scene for that reason, but I just want to know what else they were alluding to in the background.
I mean, when he slapped him, and berates him a little bit, I get the anger there.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't understand why he doesn't like him. And then you get the whole thing with John du Pont's mom. I get why du Pont is angry in many respects in the film, just because, his mom basically speaks down about wrestling and it's a low sport and all that jive. I understand all that stuff, but it's just when he's on the bike and he's looking at du Pont like he wants to kill everyone in that room, which is his brother and du Pont. And I don't know if that had been earned, I guess.
I pretty much agree with your guys' sentiments. And I think John's point, especially, like, there's this continual feeling throughout the film of like, we're missing something.
Do you think that's the intention of the film? Like I said, I feel like it's very much like a poem. It's not trying to spell everything out. It wants you to feel uncomfortable and not know what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's very possible that that's the intention. I mean, I'm just simply saying from my observation that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can absolutely, if they did do it intentionally, then great on them, because then, maybe that's the smart way to look at it, and more optimistic way. The other side of it is potentially they didn't do enough to help solidify where things were at for the audience. But in the same respect, I think to your point, on the more optimistic side, there's, at least for me, and I can only speak for myself, there's so much of this movie that is like a slow burn and is boring. And I don't know, it doesn't grab me, where those moments of not knowing do keep you engaged, right? Because then you have the constant question in your head of like, how the hell did we get here? Mm-hmm. Or did I miss something? Or, what's the thing that happened outside of what we've seen that is causing this to occur? So I don't know. I feel like it could go either way, whether intentional or not intentional, but there's definitely those feelings of gaps here and there. And it did work. I mean, it did get me to continue paying attention. I didn't have a choice regardless, but I continued to pay attention because I kept feeling like, well, there's something more below the surface here.
I have to think that it was director Bennett Miller's intention, because he's a good director. He did Capote, he did Moneyball. I mean, he's a talented director. I have to feel like that's the way he's painting it. So you are just as confused as to why this happened as everyone involved. I mean,
yeah.
Maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but it feels like that was almost the intent. Even if it didn't, I don't think it necessarily worked for the audience, though. That's the problem.
Well, see, I think the reason why it doesn't necessarily work is that, at least for me, it feels like it's playing to the lowest common denominator. You got an eccentric multi-millionaire and his live-in wrestler, and there's a lot of connotations there, at least to me, that makes it seem like a whole Cabana Boy kind of feel to it. And it's not fair to Mark. It's not fair to Mark as a person, not only just the character, but Mark as the real person. I'm completely surprised, and I don't know why I'm surprised, that Mark was married. why they didn't show the fact that he was married or had a relationship at the time of this happening, it kind of puts a whole further point of them playing to the lowest common denominator of possible reasons, or at least make you question a lot of different things. And again, not fair.
Yeah. Pretty well, because they leave like really important pieces of information out, just I guess to maybe to
for simplicity. Is that what you guys are saying? Or entice
the audience to get people to really wonder, to put a little bit more out there, maybe to keep it less complicated too. I mean, maybe that would
I
just
think
be
if they could have added those elements, then it would have been better, though. I think if they would have made it more complicated in some ways, like then there's just more. It creates more complexity to the characters. And it makes them more interesting, and it makes you more engaged. You know, like if he had his wife at home, granted, it means you have to integrate more into the story, but I don't think this movie needed to be as long as it was anyway. So they certainly could have swapped out some scenes. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if we had some inkling as to like, oh, he is married, but like she's at home, and, you know, maybe they don't talk, and it's like, okay, there's an interesting element here now too that then furthers our interest in this character and who he is.
One thing that is worth noting, right? So Mark Schultz's reaction to the movie's gone all over the place a little bit. He supported the film in general throughout the movie's creation, and he served as a consultant. But at one point, he did become angry and criticized director Bennett Miller after critics pointed out the homosexual undertones and the portrayal of that relationship.
Oh, yeah. And he was mad.
Schultz demanded that Miller address that issue, or quote unquote, I will. And Schultz said that Foxcatcher scenes are mostly straight out of my book, except for a few, but the relationships and personalities are complete fiction. And I find that fascinating, that you have a movie that's supposed to be, you know, I get it, inspired by a true story, but this one's trying to be very close to the events, and then keeps putting that illusion in that Schultz is like, was not the case. That's why I thought it was important to point out that he was married at the time, because I don't think there was any homosexual undertone in the real story, but there definitely has that flavor in the movie. All three of us said we saw it.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that Schultz did recant his criticism of the movie, saying Foxcatcher is a miracle. I'm sorry I said I hated it. I loved it, and apologized to Miller. But I also think how much of that is just trying to save face, and because it got such critical acclaim,
right?
And da.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
There's 5 Academy Award nominations.
Yeah,
At some point, somebody's going to be like, "Well, I guess this isn't so bad after all."
Yeah, maybe it's not so bad. I hope it makes a ton of money, because then I'll get a piece or something. You know. Still bones me that Channing Tatum didn't get nominated for an Oscar, but it is what it is. Now, let's talk about what the movie got right, and did it respect the victims. Mark Schultz is all over the place, so we'll answer that for him. So Mark Schultz would in fact hit himself in the face after losing. Schultz wrote in his book that he wanted to make losing the worst experience ever. So he would hit himself after a loss so that he would associate the bad wrestling match with pain, and thus motivate himself not to make the same mistakes again.
Okay, Freud. He's literally just manipulating himself into like, yeah, let me abuse myself so that way I turn away from this moving forward. Like I think, I don't know, maybe I'm not a massive athlete who went to the Olympics, so I can't really say. He's obviously got a better process.
I would say so. Yeah.
I would feel like, wouldn't
you have a hard time
take
working out like January 2nd. You know, you start on January 1st and you're like, I am so done. Maybe he's got a better process. I've been working out
lately. I just struggle.
Wow. Let me just hold on a second. I just wanted to know, did you even like open the door to that bus and have the bus stop, like the stop sign, before you ran her over it with it?
Sorry.
Like,
it's okay. I'm very vocal about hating, working out and exercising, but I've been forcing myself through it. But I feel like when you lose anything, even when you lose a game, you can take an opportunity, and I don't usually do it in the moment, but I do it after, to evaluate like, what was your strategy? What could you have done differently? And I feel like rather than hurting yourself for not succeeding. Rather, just look at your improvement going forward. I don't know. I feel like self-inflicting abuse is probably not the healthiest mechanism for this.
Well, I mean, this is the 90s and 80s. I mean, there is no such thing as good mental health for men. Yeah.
Mental health for men was not something that was ever talked about either. So, it would be considered weak, and he's in a sport where they don't want to. Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
There's a lot there. I think they did him dirty just in the way they portrayed him. They portrayed him as somebody who's has some sort of challenge or is on the spectrum to some degree, and it's not fair. I think they did him dirty.
I would agree. I think he feels that way. He just retracted it because, no, I love it. It's great. Critics loved it. I guess I'm wrong. But it's his life story, and he can say whatever he wants. It's his right.
I am not an animal.
DuPont did build a wrestling facility to train Olympic athletes. That's true, which I think everybody pretty much knows. Mark Schultz did not immediately move to Foxcatcher. DuPont first offered him a position training athletes at Villanova University, and DuPont originally wanted Dave, but Dave turned him down. So DuPont actually fired Mark from Villanova, but offered him free rent and facilities if he moved to Foxcatcher. And DuPont then made millions off of Mark's name because Mark attracted the top talent to train because he was an Olympic athlete.
Jesus.
Rich people, right?
Yeah.
Must be nice.
Yeah. Further things that were true or not true. DuPont did not get Mark hooked on drugs. That was fiction. Schultz admitted in his biography that he had done drugs before then and even had picked up some for DuPont, who did not know how or where to get it. Although later, Schultz admitted that DuPont once had a kilo of cocaine in a desk drawer. And in later years, he rarely saw DuPont sober.
So it sounds like he got him started. It was reverse. Right? he's the bad influence.
Again, we're going to talk about rich people problems here. Like, once he got addicted to cocaine, he had a whole cocaine drawer.
Yeah.
He literally,
that's how rich people advance.
Yeah.
Poor people are just like, man, I just got to get my next fix. And a rich person, once they get hooked, like, well, I got a drawer now. Guess what?
Isn't it so funny? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but isn't it so funny how different drug use is seen for people who have money versus people who don't? People who use drugs and are poor are filthy and gross and disgusting and the bane of our country's existence. And that, addicts. And then people who are wealthy, it's because they have the money to do it. It's like an elitist thing. Like, oh yeah, they do cocaine at that high school. And I'm referencing a very specific high school that I went to that was Catholic. So rich people, man, rich people.
Okay.
It's just weird. It's weird that we have these double standards based on wealth.
People want to be rich. They want to, so they can look at someone rich doing something that is wrong and think, well, I mean, if I had that kind of money, that's a sad thing.
Yeah, I saw something that rich people have in a house, which was a tiramisu drawer. And I was like, God damn it.
I'm sorry?
Need money.
A tiramisu drawer?
A tiramisu drawer.
Yeah.
Now how does this work?
Yeah. Can you get a coconut pie drawer and a clam chowder drawer?
You know, if you can have a tiramisu drawer, like I'm pretty sure you can come up with any sort of drawer of any sort of dessert you want. I'm just very jealous I don't have one of those. Forget the cocaine drawer.
Did they have somebody who was like hand delivering the tiramisu every day for like fresh tiramisu?
This is one of those houses that has a cook.
Ooh. Okay. So they refilled it. They refilled it.
I would literally, if I was rich, I would have an ice cream drawer that was frozen.
You'd have a machine.
Yeah, it would actually just be like a fridge, but it pulled out. So I could just eat straight out of the bucket.
Yeah. All these things sound possible. And, follow us for more information.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody's going to take this idea and engineer it and get rich and wealthy.
If you guys support us on Patreon, at patreon.com/The Hollywood Outsider, we'll have enough money for a tiramisu drawer. Mark Schultz claims he was never close to DuPont, as he always gave him an uneasy feeling. I think that's an interesting thing that's not shown in the movie very much.
They paint it so much like Mark is dependent on John DuPont. And it is gross. I think that this goes back
because it's really the opposite, right? It's completely the opposite. He needed his name to make money.
Right. This goes back to like, this is how gross and how much they did him dirty. And Dave ultimately is the final victim in this whole story, but he comes out smelling like roses, whereas Mark comes out and he smells like, I mean, I don't even want to know what he smells like. It's like cocaine and sadness.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true.
Cocaine and sadness. It's very distinct.
Here's what I think is funny. They basically painted it so Mark is so rage-inducing jealous of his brother that it just infuriates him and it just motivates him in all negative ways, right?
Right.
But barely touch on the obvious mommy issues that DuPont himself had.
Oh, right.
That's totally unfair, I think, in the scope of the film.
They barely touch on that. They've probably spent about 5 minutes, with the exception of, I mean, if you're paying attention, I hate horses. Horses are garbage.
Right.
I want to pull all the stuff out of here. Oh, we got gold medals. I want to put them in this special gold medal thing that we have for the horses. And his mom's like, no.
It's wild.
It really is.
Okay, for further things. There is no record of DuPont shooting a gun in practice, but Mark does claim DuPont bursted into his apartment once and pointed a gun at his girlfriend. And also Coach Dan Chade claimed DuPont once threatened him with a machine gun.
Makes sense. Rich person has guns.
Well, I mean,
that's wild, though.
They made their fortune off gunpowder, I think. So, yeah, it all makes sense.
There's just a little bit too much like casuality with him pointing guns at people.
Because he's rich and he thinks nobody's going to touch him. And also he's mentally unstable. All these things are bad.
Not a good combination.
Right. Bad when connected is what I mean.
Yeah.
Because if you have mental illness, you should seek help. Absolutely. I'm supportive of that. Aren't you guys, don't you feel good that we're in an era where it's okay to suggest to other men that mental health is okay? Mental issues are okay to have and to go get help, because it's
getting better for sure.
Better.
It's still stigmatized to a degree, but it is getting better. As somebody who goes and talks to a therapist and is on a regular basis, and somebody who I work with a psychiatrist as well for some neurodivergent issues that I have, it's getting better. I don't want to say people like me, but people like me are stepping out and being more vocal and supporting each other. And we're trying to do the best we can to support each other a lot more, because we're finding that we have been sort of like the instrument of our own destruction in a lot of ways.
Can I speak on behalf of all women on this entire planet? Yes, we are thankful that men are getting some mental health treatment and conversations around it. Dear God. We all need it, okay? The end of the day, we all need it. So
at least one woman yelled at the radio or whatever she's listening to and just said, "No, you can't." Just let you know. At least one.
Yeah, she's sitting there all mad because men are pussies now.
Jesus. Even went to that.
Can we also just say there is a way for you to still be masculine, to still hold your masculine, traditional, chivalrous traits, and also acknowledge emotions and feelings. It doesn't mean you have to outwardly express them all of the time. That's on you how you manage them, but it's about managing them and recognizing that you have them, not just suppressing them down. That's all it is. So you can still be manly man chopping wood in the backyard. Just be like, damn, I'm kind of sad today. I'm going to go chop some wood because it'll make me feel better. Cool.
I do man shit on a regular basis, and I just talked about how I go to therapy. So, I mean, I'm manly.
I'm intelligent. I have other people chop my wood. I'm not going to do that part.
I can't stand you.
I'll go buy it at the gas station. I don't care. All right. So Dave and Mark Schultz never lived at Foxcatcher together. Mark asked Dave to coach at Foxcatcher after Mark took a coaching job in Utah. Fun fact. This one, I don't think is going to be a surprise, but some people might actually be surprised. Mark Schultz did in fact lose 12 pounds before a match once.
Not surprised.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Before UFC fights and that sort of thing, they got to weigh in, they got to be a certain weight. They will go to crazy. It's amazing to me that you can lose it that way, because I should probably try to some degree. I've got no excuse.
Yeah, can I
at
get
this
those
point.
tips and tricks?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called wearing cellophane, sweating everything you possibly can completely off of you, and drinking no water. That's how you do it.
It's just dangerous for
Drinking
everything.
because water weight. I gotcha. I was like, don't you want to drink water? Water is supposed to help
after you weigh in. After you weigh in,
but that's legit. The reason why they're able to lose 12 pounds is because they're blasting their body of water weight. I knew when I was in high school, I knew these wrestlers who would wear specific sweat outfits all day, every day before a match, just to get themselves down, or they would, wrap themselves in cellophane and go for a run several times a week, or go mow their lawn that way. And this is Florida, for God's sakes, and they would do that kind of crap.
All you got to do is walk outside in Florida, and it's the same thing.
Obviously not.
Yeah, I don't not agree with that. Always John spoke about people who don't live in Florida, right?
Look,
Yeah,
I visit
always.
Florida and I literally lose 5 pounds every time because of the amount of sweating, because it's disgusting
Do not
and I
think
hate
you
it.
know what literally means. if
Yeah,
that's the
I don't
case.
know, but also, shouldn't you be happy about that?
But I feel disgusting.
Hang on,
every
I think
time
he just
I go
called
to
you fat. Wait. I think
He
he just
did.
called you fat. He
No,
totally
he did,
just
but it's okay.
That's what I heard. Well, wouldn't you be happy, Chubbs? Wouldn't you be happy, Chunks? Huh? That you lost the 5 pounds?
Didn't you attack me for it a little bit ago?
Yeah,
No,
you-
exercise. Totally
Yes.
different thing. Totally different thing. Because you make fun of it all the time. You're like, I stopped exercising on day 3 of my plan.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of exercising, Amanda, nobody actually likes it.
I know nobody likes it. I'm just not willing to suffer through it very often. I try.
Not even the people who are really good at exercise do they actually like it. They find ways to enjoy it. They find ways to make it worthwhile, but nobody actually likes it.
There's one form of cardio that's worth it, and that's all I got to say.
What I do is when I'm having a rough workout, I punch myself in the face.
Right.
See? Yeah, to
multiple
motivate
times.
yourself.
To
I just go
motivate
straight for my dick. I just start punching it there.
Well, I
'cause-
mean,
Okay.
I figure it probably takes you 3 or 4 hits before you get there. All right, so my last my last fact.
You know what? Average is okay, guys. Average is okay.
I wouldn't know. All right, so this is
Jesus Christ, I can't stand you. What the hell?
sorry, too easy.
sorry. There's not enough room for Aaron's ego and his penis, apparently, in this
This is a
podcast.
very
Truly,
serious
truly.
fact.
And the
Listen
ego
up.
is a lot larger, I'm sure.
Listen up. Dave Schultz did have PU kids written on his hand when he died. It was his turn to pick up his kids. That is the saddest thing of any of these cases that we've heard. I think that's the saddest thing. Because in my mind, that meant that, there's just so many things that run through my head with that visual, that he actually had PU kids written on his hands.
It's heartbreaking. It is literally one of the most depressing things I've heard in a long time.
Very, very sad.
It also makes me very thankful that apparently his kids weren't there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's a very optimistic way to look at that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you've had enough talk of flopping penises and murder to motivate your day. We're going to get out of here.
Go to the
But-
gym, I guess.
Oh, wait. What would you have done differently? Would you have done anything differently? I would remake this movie with the same cast and a tighter script and a different director.
Yeah, I would do the same. I would actually follow the story much closer than it really was, and I would honor Mark because he doesn't come out of this looking pretty at all. So I would honor Mark a bit more too.
I would add and subtract. There's some stuff that I don't feel we needed in the movie that could have been more beneficial by having a more dynamics in the movie, I guess. And hell, tell us what his wife is doing.
Yeah, way to answer the question without actually answering the question.
I know. I don't have specifics of what they'd integrate. I'm like, let's tighten this up a little bit and maybe add some more substance.
Absolutely. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, share this show on your social media outlets and give us a review in your favorite podcast app. You are our best source of promotion. So please tell your true crime maniac friends about it. Thank you for listening once again to Inspired by a True Story. Now let's keep those artists honest. like horses that owns a farm. What a weird. That should be your.
That is a
That
very
should be
weird
the
thing. That's the only thing
tipping
that you
point.
should like at the farm.
I have nothing to add to this.
Never been on a farm?
Never
No, I've been on a
horse?
farm. I just like, I don't think any farm animal is cool. Maybe ducks. I like ducks.
Of course, you picked the one with the smallest
so
penis.
Weird. Oh,